Hey, this is Mo Lunsford at Union Grove Lumber Studios.
And this is the Shed Geek. We want to welcome you to today's episode.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of the Shed Geek podcast. And I'm afraid to put my hands anywhere because we're using these wireless mics, and I hope that you guys are hearing us okay. But we're back with, I don't even know, round 3, possibly?
Out on my own, yeah. 3 on my own.
Yeah.
This is number 5.
I don't know. We've done a lot. We'll probably do a lot more. I always get good feedback from your shows. There's also some very how do I say this without being offensive? There's some people that I think a lot of that are just well-developed business personalities, good business acumen, good heads on their shoulders who are always like, there's certain people I look for on your podcast that I'm always interested in hearing. And I'm like, you should be interested in hearing from everyone. Everyone's got a good story. But your name comes up top of the list of any of those. So they like what you have to say.
I find it interesting being, I guess, the recipient of the compliment. And I thank you. I always find it interesting that people find some of my thoughts interesting. But I do get calls still today. You know, my time at RTO National, my time back on the banking side and the auto side, and just kind of the overlap between the worlds. I think it gave me a interesting perspective. I won't say unique, but interesting. You know, auto retail, auto lending, big banking, all overlapped in my career in that field, which I did that a lot longer than I ever did sheds.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I tell people, you know, when I was with ADP Digital, you know, most people think ADP is payroll, but when they did those, you know, they own automobile marketing and advertising firms. I sold one of the first big social media aggregators that anybody had ever made, and you know, watched it in its days when it was functional. And you look at those things now in comparison to what the shed industry's done, especially post-COVID, you know, since 2020, and the parallels are there. You know, you and I joked one night, I was there in the room when the investors were pitching Carvana for the first time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and you see what it turned into and how much it kind of changed a lot of things. You go back to CarMax, you know, and then you think and you look at some scenarios like that as you could compare to the shed industry without getting specific. But some of them you can, you know, they're big enough and publicly traded, you know, Tough Shed's partnership with Home Depot and some others with Lowe's, and you look at those things, you know, Costco and the big box, and then you look at that change of what it faces the industry. I think those experiences have served me well in the shed industry because it kind of gives you a view of the possible. It's not always going to track the same way. But it definitely shows you a path that's maybe a little more likely.
Yeah.
And, you know, and going from the rent-to-own side with RTO National and then doing financing, and RTO National, to their credit, we played heavy in the tech side. We touched marketing and websites and computers and e-cigs and all those. And then coming out as a dealer, I think that's one of the things people ask me is, you know, what did you see as a non-dealer that you would recommend a dealer change or do, and have you done those things? And that's still the humbling part. I was at the GSCB show yesterday, you know, and somebody asked me a very similar question yesterday evening, and I was like, there's so many things I know I should have already done that I've not. Because, you know, no matter what industry you're in and no matter what you're doing, the understanding and acceptance that time is the most critical asset and value that everybody has, and the great ideas that are never implemented are worth nothing. You know, and I've got some acquaintances that I told a gentleman I know, I'd probably even give him a shout out, and I don't think he would mind, but I gave him a compliment from my perspective, somebody I talked to, and Joe Shivers, you know, Shivers Buildings, I mentioned him, you know, in Mississippi. I told Joe, I said, I'm always impressed by it. And Joe goes, well, why would you say that? Because you're always, you know, when you hear things back about yourself, you know, get, you know, you're so influential in the market. You know, I just started out doing a podcast, you know, and it's like, you go, well, why? And I was like, because in my mind, Joe's one of those guys. It's not complicated what he does. He just executes. He actually implements 4 or 5 great new ideas every year. And actually follows through, implements them, and he'll be honest with you, that one didn't work and I dropped it, but 3 of them did. And the company gets better constantly. And I think that was always the struggle. I've had the fortune of running some really big publicly traded. It's just finding that initiative to implement the ideas.
The value of the implementation is worth so much more than the idea.
Yeah. Phil and I used to joke at RTO National. He goes, that's why I love you. Richard, you got great ideas and all that, but Richard will map it out, he'll diagram it, he'll show you, he'll give you the roadmap, and then he leaves. It was always up to somebody behind me to implement.
Every personality test I've got falls heavy on the vision, and I'm like, when I hear people say there's nowhere else to go, or there's no place for the next creative idea in the shed industry, and I'm like, man, I have to shut down so many ideas because I can't fruitfully implement them constantly. I can do a bang up job, right, and be quote unquote, to use your word, influential to no avail. Why was I so excited to get this off the ground that didn't go anywhere? It takes a team. I think it really takes a team in most cases. If you can find the Willie Mays type of person who is a 5-tool player who can do so many different things. I laugh and joke all the time. I say I'm Mark McGwire. Like, I hit home runs and then I strike out. So like that's kind of been my consistency, is not being able to stay in the middle. Be a decent hitter, just put the ball into play. Nah, it's swinging for the fences or you get nothing at all. And trying to find those people in the middle who can help you implement an idea.
They say in the profile test, 10% of the world's truly leaders, and most people would consider themselves, but when they break down and you do the psych profiles, like, you and I both spend a lot of time on in different careers, you look at it and you go, there aren't really that many people that are truly that, but there are some really great executors. And finding those executors and give them the opportunity. And then there's a group that just wants to, hey, tell me what to do today. Let me do it for the amount of time I'm required to do it, and then let me get out of here.
Yeah.
And it takes those people. Yeah. You got to have a bunch of them. And then there's ones that no matter what you tell them and how hard you push them, they're never going to do anything. It all kind of breaks down into a societal norm. But when you're looking at a shed dealer or a manufacturer or a concept and how to do it, but yeah, for me, it's just implementing. Every time I launch a new software or a new idea, here at Banks, then I hurt my feelings and I go out and stop and I realize that I've got a lot with a new hire that doesn't have up-to-date price sheets in the sheds and the signage. It's the basics. Are you there? Do you look presentable? Is it a good customer experience? And maintaining that focus on the basics, the air quote basics, while still pushing to the future for the innovative new. That's the great challenge, I think.
Here at Identigro, we have been providing custom nameplates for the shed and furniture industry for over 20 years. We are so pleased to know that shed manufacturers see the value in expressing their shed brand to potential customers using an Identigro nameplate. When you add an attractive decal to your product, you will more than pay for the cost with increased sales. Clients will not only be able to identify the shed brand, but it will help to brand and advertise to potential customers who can easily see the nameplate, and in many cases, find a phone number or website to shop for themselves. At Identigro, we are happy to continue to serve and invite you to visit our website at identigro.com or give us a call at 540-283-9193. You can even fax us at 540-283-9194 or visit our website by clicking on the Shed Geek newsletter and then simply fill out some basic information for a free catalog or free samples. Thank you, Shed Industry, for allowing us to serve you in identifying your sheds. Identigro, identify your products, grow your business.
We did a marketing presentation. I'm starting to do more of these speaking engagements. I'm super tickled about getting invited to do a keynote in Millersburg, and I'm just eating this up. I'm soaking it in because I'm studying so hard to say exactly what I want to say, and I'm excited about the content. So one of the things that I said in this marketing presentation the other day is a quote that I really love. It says the least common characteristic among the human race is consistency. It's the fact that we can't be consistent every day. I mean, anybody who's a weightlifter who builds muscle doesn't go a lot at once and then none at all. It's the consistent. A runner, a biker, anyone good in business, anyone good in most any area of their life has a certain level of discipline that just exists. And it's...
How many business management books have the word habit in them? How do you create a successful habit? 14 steps, 12 days, all the different moving pieces that you think that, to your point, it's just how do you consistently go up? And, when you're leading a company or you're leading the way, it's making sure there's people with you and maybe more accurately behind you that are consistent in fulfilling it. It goes back to that piece of the why. Are you making sure to slow down to explain to the people around you or the people that are expected to fulfill your idea and vision? Do they understand why? Because if they don't understand why, they'll never innovate. I used to draw this diagram when I would do training classes about, when we would go in back in the banking days or even in the car dealership days, you'd take over a company, the first problem was always take all the people separately and ask them what the goal is. What was their objective? And when you got a new company, you would find everybody said something different. That's problem number one. The old everybody in the boat rowing in the same direction, how much, So problem one was always everybody defined the goal differently. But then when you looked at the processes to reach the goal in any company, there were all these little side trails, what I call rabbit holes, that had nothing to do with actually reaching that goal. There was a lot of energy and effort, sometimes very well documented, that had no real impact on what the true goal of the company was. And then the problem you had there was the people that were in that process to achieve that goal, they might know and do good at what they were assigned in that role to do, but they didn't understand why the person in the process before them or the person after them did what they did. And they never innovated, and that's why I always called the big why. They never. Once everybody understood the why, and I would sit in these leadership management training seminars, and they would talk about it, and they're going, "It's not that simple." I said, "It really is." Problem one is define the goal and make sure everybody in the company defines the goal the same. Step two is look at your processes and do they actually reach the goal? And eliminate anything that's not truly dedicated to reaching that goal, or redefine your goal. If you're actually doing something that's that important and it doesn't reach that goal, there's something wrong in your goal definition.
Your answer beat me to my question. But, the telephone game, you're literally talking about the telephone game. Get everybody out here, show them what to do. By the time you get to the end of it, it'll be something completely different.
Yep.
Like we've all seen and experienced this. And there's a saying that says communication is key. We all grew up hearing this saying, and it's been around for years and years now, right? And there's this new thought I'm seeing more often that says communication is not the key, comprehension is the key. You can communicate all you want. I'm reading a book right now called The Gift of Giving, because that's what part of my keynote speech is going to be on. And he says there's enough resources in the world to feed and get everyone water. We have the intelligence, we have the resources, yet it never happens year after year after year. It's not because we can't communicate that. We all know that everyone needs food and water. Why can't we comprehend the process to make it happen? But we can't. Like there's people starving today, and there's people who have excess, and it's like at the most common level, we should be able to get food, water, shelter, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, just your basic needs.
Yep.
But we can't do that, and that's probably a much bigger conversation that goes along with a lot of other things. But typically speaking, why can't we communicate? So like in a shed company, a shed business, or any kind of business, what is and you kind of answered it with your points 1 and 2, but feel free to expand on like points 3, 4, and 5. Where do people fail?
When we would break it down this simple in my past, and I can hear a few of my former team members and leaders that worked with me cringing right now, because I would always deliver it very bluntly. If you went in to take over a company, especially a fairly large company, and what would happen is you would spend a few days doing these surveys, the employee surveys, defining the goal, looking at the processes, getting all mapped. And then you would bring all the middle and senior management into a room. And you would go, let me explain something to you. The first thing is we're going to define the goal and get everybody on the same page. Second thing is we're going to define the process and make sure it actually is dedicated to the goal and meets the goal. Third thing is that sure everybody understands their role in the process and they understand why the person before them and after them, the step in the process is important. We're going to give them the why. Then we're going to go look at, does everybody have the tools and resources necessary? If you actually have a team that everybody defines the goal the same way, everyone has vetted the process and it actually is dedicated to reaching that goal and that goal only, and it works. Everybody that works in that process knows their role and why the role before them and after them is important and can innovate, and they have the tools and resources. There are only 3 possible outcomes. Success, if you actually achieve that, success is an enormous likelihood. If you find an individual that's not having success or it's not reaching it, you find you have the wrong people. They didn't understand what they needed and they said yes, so they need more training, more support. Or you have the wrong people in the wrong role. You have great salespeople building sheds. You have great shed builders selling sheds, to use a more appropriate. The third one is unwilling. Unfortunately, when you come into a group and you take over any company or team, the people that can tell you, I know the goal, I know the process, I know why it's important, and you go, well, why aren't you succeeding? The reality is they're unwilling.
Are you a dealer who sells multiple products at your shed lot? Are you tired of sifting through clunky or overcomplicated softwares to simply sell a product? If so, it's time to call Cal. Consumer Aligned Logistics is the affordable, simplified, and scalable solution for your shed, carport, or even RTO company. We are partnered with Idea Room and Shed Pro for configurators and have multiple RTO partners to choose from JMag to Heartland to Shed Geek Rentals and Scott's RTO. And if your partner isn't listed here, just ask. We are happy to add more. Give us a call at 425-359-3279 or visit calcanhelp.com. That's CALCANHELP.com.
Why are people not willing to have food and water for everybody? Because some people are unwilling to share the food and water they have with enough people, even though it is causing suffering and death to other places. They're unwilling to participate and follow through. The hardest thing, though, is eliminating those people needs to be done as fast as you can humanly do it. And there is no positive outcome to not eliminating that person from your team. Because a person you can clearly define, if you can sit down with them and they have all the answers, they understand the role, they know what's required of them, and they just don't do it day after day after day after day, you not eliminating them. So then the reality is when you go into a company or a team and you take them over and you find, positive, negative, whatever, my job and a lot of my career was spent going into situations that were not good. I would be recruited and brought in to fix problems. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The reality is there would be some small group of these unwillings, but they weren't the problem. The problem was the leadership, the middle management, the senior management, or the ownership that was unwilling to do anything about it. The failure was always on the leadership. And the harshness of that meeting, when I was talking about people would cringe when I tell this story, is I would look at the group of leaders that I'm sitting with after we do the surveys and the employee guides and we mapped it all out and we look at them and go, and the reality is the 30% of people we need to get rid of are in this room right now. Because your other employees aren't performing at their maximum because they know you're not dealing with the 3 problem children that you have because you're unwilling. You're the unwilling one. You're the unwilling one to actually lead, take the action, enforce the vision, and drive it forward to be successful.
Let's bring this down to a shed level, and I'm going to get really picky here and alienate some of my audience, okay? Just a bit. I'm going out.
So we're going to do the thing we always do.
I'm going out on a wire a little bit here. Consignment lots, as a good example. Like, I love dealers. I love dealers as much as anyone else. But there's just change from one decade to the next. I'm not saying there aren't some consistencies in the way that you sell, the way you market. Me and you talked last time we were here, you can still throw 15 sheds out on your front lawn and make a living. And if you're an individual, that's fine. But if you're going to move at scale, there's trends in retail that happen outside of the shed world. And I've told several companies this. I almost love to tell this story, that you can take and scale this idea that, let's say you have 100 dealers. Number 1 and number 2 always compete for number 1, right? Mm-hmm. Number 3 through 10 are interchangeable, good sales. 10 through 90 or 95, unwilling to some extent.
Unable or unwilling. It doesn't really matter which one of those two it is. 5
or 10 of those dealers probably should have got rid of yesterday, and you've been debating it for a year anyway. Now, you can take that and do it whether you have 5 dealers, 10, 20, or 400. That's typically the case, I think, the most fine, especially if it's a consignment situation. There's a dedication that a manufacturer has to his dealer and his dealer network. And most of everyone I've seen in the industry has sometimes even an unhealthy willingness to work with those shed dealers beyond what's necessary. They do their best to help them sell. They bring them $200,000 worth of inventory. That's not enough. I need $400,000. That's the only reason I'm not selling, is because I don't have enough to sell. But dealers with less inventory are selling more. And you have to justify the two, and you have to think through these difficult things, especially as a sales manager. What dedication does the dealer have to the manufacturer? And maybe answer, what does the manufacturer have to the dealer? Because it becomes very frustrating whenever they don't want to embrace any new ideas or technologies, or just the way business is done even outside the shed industry a lot of times.
I mean, in the Southeast, we saw it, 1819, several big manufacturers, one in particular, shut down, just to not due to failure. They just had to get out of the industry. And at my time at RTO National, we saw this several times. And the problem is the other manufacturers didn't have the capacity, a lot of them, to fill the hole on consignment. You were starting to see the difficulty in getting inventory funding at a manufacturing level, which started to end a lot of consignment. And it changed very rapidly. And I think that was forcing for a while there. But then COVID came and everybody sold everything they could. And there was a spring back, there was low interest rates for a long time to maintain. So all of a sudden manufacturers had inventory funding lines and were able to borrow money and do these things. Some of them were cash rich because they were selling everything they could build as fast as they could build it, even though material costs were skyrocketing. So that tolerance of an unproductive location or dealer started escalating again. And you see that go out there. And again, I always thought it was great. I'm not necessarily knocking a consignment model, but as things get more interesting, you talk about consolidation, where the big are getting bigger and the small are going away. And as costs rise, carrying cost of inventory, just the lack of inventory funding, it's harder and harder to get now. I mean, as a manufacturer myself, and of course the big ones are soaking up huge lines. So the people that have the cash are going, would I rather back a huge entity or back, 12 small entities that may not can succeed? And then what are those? It gets harder to make those decisions. But a lot of it, I think, is still the manufacturer not willing to set clear expectations and then enforce them. Then some of it's just the dealer, though, and something, I promoted it in my time at RTO National. We started offering consignment dealers their own independent inventory funding and encouraged them to set up relationships with multiple manufacturers, which most manufacturers despise and want exclusivity as they went about it. And it was why, because in the era of post-COVID, when inventory was so scarce, I had some clients at those days that, they couldn't get enough buildings to meet their demand. So it required multiple manufacturers.
Hello, shed sellers. Let's take a moment to discuss the shed customer and meeting their expectations. I remember growing up in the neighborhood where a certain percentage of the houses had well-manicured lawns and well-manicured homes. These were the type of individuals who felt it was important to purchase a well-constructed home or vehicle, or maybe equipment to help maintain the quality of the item. As shed manufacturers, we seek to provide a well-built quality shed. We want the customer to feel satisfied that their hard-earned money has been well spent on a product that will last. At LuxGuard, we believe adding high-quality rubber flooring to your line of sheds makes sense to the customer and adds value the customer can appreciate. With each year, sheds are becoming more complex. The customizations we are seeing are virtually endless. LuxGuard not only gives a complimentary aesthetic appearance for their shed, but also protects the floor from spills and keeps cleanup simple. Offer your customer the customer service they seek with LuxGuard. At LuxGuard, we are committed to delivering exceptional customer service and innovative products to help our customers achieve their goals. We strive to meet the evolving needs of the customers. To speak with one of our ready-to-serve customer product specialists, simply call 336-468-4311. To see our product and view an installation video, just visit our website at luxguard.com. LuxGuard, the floor that lasts a lifetime.
But you saw what that happened in the steel industry. You know, you and I have been around the industry long enough. Used to, you could only have one steel manufacturer. That was it. You know, you could have one steel provider as a shed dealer. They'd give you a demo usually, but you had to sell them and them exclusively. A lot of the steel manufacturers still like to say they ask in their dealer agreement for exclusivity, but I mean, you know, if we could poll everybody listening right now, how many of you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 steel manufacturers or a dozen steel manufacturers, and it's just become the norm that everybody uses multiples? So I think the twist happened on both sides of it. You started seeing consignment dealers finding ways to go become competitive and look for better and better deals from their manufacturers. You had manufacturers facing financial and inventory restrictions and wanting to be clearer in their expectations as they got bigger. Then the third front started, which was large aggregating, no consignment dealer, company-owned location lots as being the big growth model of a lot of them. You know, I know several big manufacturers myself that converted from a consignment dealer network to their own in-house because you wanted that control. If I'm going to spend the money in marketing and advertising, I wanted the control. I wanted to know what happened to it, and I wanted to know when you quit selling for me or you resigned.
Yeah,
I still own that customer and that lead, you know, and that's, you know, and again, I talked about earlier, we were talking about my auto experience. We saw that in auto. Even, you know, and now the big war in auto, which is a way bigger industry, is, you know, will Tesla continue to sell directly to the manufacturer without a dealer network? You know, the big three domestics argued for a while trying to do away with some of their dealer network and did start selling directly themselves a little bit, and they still do. But that hadn't quite gone away, but the requirements to be a franchise car dealer for the manufacturers became way more aggressive.
I want to ask a question so bad right now, and I'm trying to figure out, because I'm not the source of the idea. I'm just happen to be on a platform where I can talk about the idea, and I'm kind of curious your thoughts on it. And some things I talk to you with the microphone off, and some things I talk with you on the microphone on.
Sure.
And I'm curious about how they will feel about this. But what are your thoughts on, you know, rent to own? Probably 50% of all sales in the U.S., 40%.
Average is about 50, yeah. Used to be.
So
probably still is.
Yeah, I would think thereabouts. And they also control so much of the industry through contracts, relationships, value. Those three things give RTO companies a lot of different fingers in the pie. What do you call it? I don't know. However they say that. I'm terrible at puns. But why not direct to consumer?
It's an eventuality that will come. You know, and you're talking about direct to consumer.
You run around talking to all these companies, build relationships, offer perks, fringe benefits, all these things. You know, the manufacturers can almost hold a lot of the rent to own at bay with these dealer premiums. You don't give me more, I go over here. There's not enough yield left to give away. Doesn't exist. It's it's not a reality. But whoever's willing, what does John Travolta say in the movie where he's a lawyer? He says, you spend and spend and spend on these cases, and the first, the one to lose is the first person who comes to their senses. And it's kind of that way. And we're how much yield can you give away? When can you go to direct to consumer? And I'm not saying they're holding hostage rent-own companies, but there's just so many out there right now. It's just it's.
Well, and I see your perspective. You're going, they're holding the rent-to-own companies hostage, but the other side is there's a lot of people would say my rent-to-own company's holding me hostage.
Well, I mean,
and it's one of those because, and you look at it over the last few years.
Do you mean by like contractually, or do you mean through influence?
All of the above.
Okay.
Well, think about it. How many major software operating systems require or a rent? So you kind of go, I want to be a dealer. So we go, let's be very specific to the shed industry. The verticals. There's building a shed, there's selling a shed, there's moving a shed, and there's payment offerings on a shed. Right? You can call marketing its own thing, but it kind of blends into the selling of a little bit, I think. But how many of those control multiple of those verticals, or they significantly impacted? So as a manufacturer, to grow and scale, you usually need some type of funding to buy materials and support the inventory. You got to set inventory out to be able to sell it or be able to build it and rotate it. So where does that funding come from? We've already talked about the vast majority of the funding in this industry comes from the people that are the payment providers. Well, then what did they do? Well, to be a payment provider, I needed to be able to see your inventory, manage your inventory, and oversee it because I'm loaning you all the money on it. So what did the payments providers do? They either partnered with, financed, or bought or created their own software companies that then were locked to the manufacturer. So then you go as a seller, as a manufacturer, you then got, so because I borrowed my money from this payment provider says the only way I can do it is I have to use the software that works with their payment system because that's the only way they can check my inventory, fund my inventory, and keep track of me. So then I have dealers that are consignment or independent that want to sell 2 or 3 different brands, but I'm going, I can't control that, but you're going to have to use my software and you're going to have to use my system to be able to do it, right?
So,
and you kind of go in, or the manufacturer goes, if I can't get enough independent dealers that are willing to do it my way, I'm going to have to go open my own locations or I can't get my funds.
This is James Price of Shed Pro on Faith in Business. In 2003, British cycling changed forever. For over 100 years, the British cycling team had never won the Tour de France, and only once won a single gold medal. That all changed when they hired a new performance director. His approach was different from any other coach. He applied what he called the aggregation of marginal gains. The whole principle came from the idea that if you broke down everything you could think of that goes into riding a bike, and then improve it by 1%, you would get a significant increase when you put them all together. The team changed everything by 1%, even going so far as hiring a surgeon to teach the riders how to best wash their hands to reduce the risk of catching a cold. They found the best pillows to create a better night's sleep. They painted the inside of the team truck white so they would notice dust that would degrade performance on the bikes. In just 5 years, the British cycling team dominated the road, winning 60% of the gold medals. Then they became the first British team to win the Tour de France and continued to win 5 victories in the next 6 years. This is James Price. Thanks for listening.
Do you think it's a value add to move toward one centralized system that's beneficial, or do you think it's I sometimes, got into some of the adventures that I've gotten into, not with my initial thoughts of I want to jump into that. Admittedly, I've I won't use the word forced into it because you can get into whatever you want, but right now we offer services that people are attempting to infiltrate, and sometimes you feel like the only way that I can protect those services and my customers is to jump into a bigger program that offers more. And then the questions become, can I do all of that? Can I accomplish all of that well? Because if I can't, I lose my trusted brand.
Very few
identity.
people do all the verticals well. There's great manufacturers that aren't great at selling. There's great salespeople that aren't great at payments or delivery. There's, transportation verticals. You start looking, and the whole idea is, and I used to tell my partner George, we and I talk about it. I said, ultimately, if you wanted to paint a utopian vision of an opportunity, it would be to be a manufacturer and make a little bit on manufacturing, but build a good building of high quality with a reasonable margin. Have your own sales locations and sell them with a reasonable profit individually for the sale and maintain that distribution. Have a transportation company that is independently profitable as a transportation company, but only supports your manufacturing and sales, and then be your own payments provider. Mm-hmm. And be able to be profitable enough that you don't have to do it. So you control all pieces and you can flex it based on your market need or competition.
So maintain some autonomy between each company, but also maintain some synergy if they need to operate and work well together.
Because you always see, if it was dominated by a manufacturer, the manufacturer would air the profits to the manufacturing side at the expense of the dealer or the transportation or the payments provider. If the dealer was controlled by the payments provider, it always aired to the payments provider. More money for the repos, less money, all these. If it was owned, there's a few entities, not many that I'm aware of, but there's more and more happening where people that were transporters became dealers. And then some of them have even become dealers and manufacturers. And now they have because they're very aggressive on the transportation side, being very profitable at the expense of the other sides. And the reality is there is a certain, standard basic economics that says supply and demand. The demand of the market is going to say you have to be competitive in an aggregate of what the customer ends up paying. So whoever controls all of it and can slope all of those costs to a natural even can actually be more profitable on all than focusing on one or the other, because it skews what the customer ends up paying. The problem I found to it, there's a bunch of questions in that, but I wanted to make one quick point. Software, and me and Phil did it, and both of us did a joint presentation. We went into 2019 with a set of goals, and by the beginning of 2020, software had become the sole focus in the competitive landscape that then drove all of it. And there is still, in my opinion, not a turnkey solution that is not either heavily influenced, controlled, or owned by somebody in one of those other verticals that forces you to not be able to do your purest vision of your own business. And that's the thing. I've always wanted, I still don't think I have one today myself. I'm working hard with some new partners on how I think about it, and I go, I want to be able to run my business with one system and it not be constraining me. Now, don't get me wrong, it happens everywhere in the car business, all things. I've got software and it requires me to use this accounting system, or it requires me to use this credit card processing. Everybody would love to have open market autonomy, but that will be what then changes it. The prediction that somebody said, and it's not there yet because of the transportation piece, is when there is an open auction forum for sheds. The minute it does that is it slopes the competition straight out there, because there's not an open market that's universal.
We're in, maybe I'm in rare form. I get asked all the time, why don't you go a little deeper on the podcast? And I say, well, couple reasons. One, I don't want to alienate my listeners by going too deep, so I stay a little bit broad, and I always want to be respectable to all the industry. You know what I mean? So all agencies, but I'll go at least a little bit deeper here today, and maybe it piques people's curiosity, maybe not, but I just wanted to sell advertising, Richard, whenever I got started.
Yeah.
Initially I just wanted to sell advertising, and even that was very combative. You know what I mean? So once I realized, wait a minute, we're making people millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm not asking to make what you make. I'm saying, I can't even get their advertising. I can infiltrate this place and do well, even if I don't do the best.
Right.
We can gather a huge market share, and that's kind of what we did. And I felt like I won't say we've been forced, because I want to hold I don't want to hold anybody out there at blame for my decisions. Like, we've decided to go here or go there or do this. But what I've learned is that, like, no one, and this is the thing I fall back on that I have very much peace about. No one on earth can stop me from helping someone.
Sure.
I don't care if you control something, manipulate something. I don't care if you have influence over something. There's one thing that people like, and it's that they like being helped. And there's one thing that no one can stop, is they can't stop you from helping someone, whether it's for free, through education, or whatever, or direct help. People want help, and people will accept your help. They will be happy for your help. Now, whether or not they'll pay you for it,
right,
that is where the disparity comes between being a giver and a taker. Knowing when you're owed money for your services, what's fair. We made, probably the first 2 years, made tons of money. And then I was like, hey, will you throw some advertising my way? And it's like, why would we do that? You're making us lots of money without doing it.
Sure. I think, you and I, before the camera started rolling and the microphone was on, we were talking about some things, and it's going, I found it was one of the biggest cultural differences when I came out of auto and then the big publicly traded into this space was, in those spaces, you just assumed everybody was going to do whatever they felt was possible to their own best personal interest or their business's interest.
Yeah.
And you just assumed that. So everything you did came with that sense of skepticism, I guess. In the shed industry, I see a lot of people that take affront that somebody didn't do what that individual's perception of was the right thing to do by their perspective, not the other person's perspective. Yeah. And they always wanted, well, I should have been, why didn't you call me and let me do that for you? I could have done it for cheaper. And it's like, well, at the time I needed to do this, or I was moving, or I didn't know you wanted to do that. And it's always that.
But I'm going to jump in there because I got that. I remember specifically jumping into marketing, and I got a couple of calls that was like, why didn't you partner with me?
Yeah.
That's one of the first calls you get. And look, those are great guys. It's not, you know what I mean? Because I wouldn't want to partner with them. But I would start by saying this. Everyone I know is always for hire.
Yeah.
Everyone I know is always for hire. You can always call someone and say, hey, I was thinking about this, and it seems like you'd be the guy or the gal to help us roll this out. But you can't read anybody's mind. So it's like, well, I think we can jump into this space. And we weren't trying to hurt anybody because we believe in equal opportunity. We let our competition. I always love it whenever I get criticism, because we let our competition advertise on the network.
Sure.
No, they don't always choose to, and that's okay. But I'm like, well, you're welcome to. I can't fulfill every customer anyway. Matter of fact, we probably don't have the capacity. I know we don't have the capacity. In any direction we go in.
There's enough business for us all to do. But at the same time, that's not an excuse, or is it asking for a pass? Should I have to apologize for doing? I just wish people would be more honest. No, I'd made a decision that I thought was in my best interest and the best interest of my business at the time, and I followed through with it. And I'm looking at you going, and you were not that decision, and I'm okay with that, and I hope you are too.
And I made that decision, and I made that ultimately. I had to take that approach to a couple of things. I must be in super rare form today to even talk about this, but it's one of the perfect examples is I'm going to move forward in this area. And I would like for you to continue to be an advertiser. No, I'm picking on advertisers just for a minute. No, I won't be an advertiser because it gives clout to your platform. And I need for your platform to be diminished. But on the backside of that conversation is, we want you to be exclusive with me. So
it's all or nothing.
I'm either ultra valuable, or I'm completely not valuable at all.
Are you swimming in leads but struggling to close the deal? It's time to turn those leads into profits with Making Sales Simple, the ultimate sales training program designed specifically for shed sales professionals. At Making Sales Simple, we understand the challenges you face, overwhelmed by inquiries, unsure how to follow up, and missing opportunities that can boost your bottom line. Our proven techniques help you and your team master the art of connecting with customers, building trust, and closing deals like never before. Whether you're new to the industry or a seasoned pro, this training will sharpen your skills, increase your conversions, and drive your business to new heights. Don't let those leads go cold. Invest in your team's success today. Making sales simple, because every lead deserves a closer.
And that's probably my flawed perception of the way they should react. They can choose to do whatever they want. And I'm not picking on anyone in particular, just to be clear. There's been a couple of those conversations that you're like, wow, this is weird. And just never found myself in that area of business. So I have to go back to what I know, which is nothing in this situation, and make the best decision I know how to make for our business, our family, all of that. But I always promote even other people.
Well, it's always your fault when you're not willing to do somebody else's, to their best interest, and that's the reality. I guess that's my thing, is I'm just surprised that people take it so personally, that human nature is what it is. And it's not to say people aren't good people. I don't think any of this, I think that was my thing, coming up in a harsher, more, let's face it was a cutthroat environment. Yeah. Especially in the early days in auto, coming out, the early.
But you've helped me even in this situation. You've called me out. Mm-hmm. You've been like, why are you being so sensitive to that? And I'm like, I don't know. Thought they were my friends.
Yeah, and it's like, what about friendship has anything to do with making a business decision? And it has, and you kind of wish you had that advantage to say, there's all these kumbaya moments. But the reality is, I think it just has to become more second nature. And that kind of goes back to our whole deal of people making the hard decisions. Mm-hmm. How many people do you know that actually made a business decision based on a personal tie or a friendship, and they ignored the screaming business signs, and then after the fact got burned horribly for it? Yeah. And I used to tell people, I'm all about generosity. I feel like I'm a fairly generous person myself, both, helping others and family and friends. But I'm also a very good one, like with my son coming up, I'm going, but never give away anything you're not comfortable just walking away from and not getting anything for. Mm-hmm. Because if it's not a true act of charity or goodwill, then it's a business decision. Mm-hmm. And don't pretend that the two overlap. It's you know what I mean. They kind of separate themselves. We kind of went to a different place with it when you start talking about business perspectives and how you build things. I'm still.
Well, I bring up the podcast just to be clear for anybody listening, not to scold anybody. I bring up the podcast because it's my experience. Sure. I can't speak on your experience, but I do know this. I've talked to, I don't know, we've done 300 interviews. I've probably been in 30 states. I've talked to 3,000 shed dealers at least, and more people in the industry. And not one in a deep conversation have I not come across the hint that they've had a bad business relationship situation, a partnership fall apart. You know what I mean? Whatever the situation is. And I think I had a lawyer friend of mine one time tell me the same thing. Thank goodness that you're honest enough and vocal enough to tell me too, because of our friendship, I don't know. But this lawyer friend of mine told me the same. Says, well, you're just naive. And you're just like, you can't talk to me like that. And he's like, no, you're naive. I mean, what makes you think that a friendship's going to outlast with, a business decision when marriages fall apart after 30 years? He said, you're being completely naive. That's why it's important to find a way to separate what your business relationship and your personal relationship is. And that's really hard for me because I tangle them all together. And I don't know another way. So
I love this. Again, I hear my wife cringing when I tell this story. But, do you know the children's story, in the book, The Emperor's New Clothes? I always found that an interesting story growing up, and I had it and read it to my son who's in his 30s now, and I got grandkids. But, if you've not read it, the premise is you get out there and you go, there was this emperor, and basically two con men got into the castle and convinced him that they had made the most beautiful clothes. But the royal court were all lackeys and were afraid to tell the emperor, who was afraid to tell them he couldn't see the clothes because they weren't real. So everybody agreed with him. It was the most fabulous, and he looked the best he ever had. So now the emperor, who's afraid to disagree with these two great salespeople, and whose royal court now enforces it, decides to take a parade out into the community naked because no one is willing to tell the emperor he actually has nothing on.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all fine, oh, look how beautiful he is. And as it spreads, it just becomes a commonality until a small child walks up the middle of the road and goes, he's got no clothes on. And then the facade collapses and everything goes around you. And you kind of go, in my own personal career coming up, I actually did this. My wife was so angry with me. I bought a bunch of copies of the Emperor's New Clothes and sent them to one of the boards of one of the publicly traded companies I work for. And I signed them. I'm not saying it went well for me. But the problem is sometimes you can convince yourself because you're getting feedback from others that are just willing to agree with you. You know, that whole thing, you know, I think I might have even heard it on one of your shows. One of your interviewers said, you know, people listen to respond, not to understand. Mm-hmm. So everybody gets caught up in the fact now they've said something and they put a response out there that then manifests an idea that even they don't believe in and can factually disprove, but it becomes fact because it has a life of its own and it rolls. And I feel like the shed
industry, or they're just afraid to back down from it.
Well, and I think we're still all dealing with that hangover from the just raging, pick it out of the sky success of COVID in the shed industry. You know, for 2.5, 3 years, you could sell and make money doing almost nothing. Mm-hmm. People were lined up, you know, and it's amazing over my year and a half of doing my own thing, how many people I talk to going, man, and they're new, you know, they started in 21, 22, and they're going, it's hard now, you know, it's really hard, you know, and I'm going, it's still not as bad as it was in 18 and 19. You know, 19 was staring down a barrel of 20 that looked bad. As an industry, my job was to forecast the industry, and we were looking at a fairly significant decline in annual sales at that point in sheds heading into 2020. I mean, to the point we were talking about 6, 7, 8% decline nationally in shed sales.
And when COVID happened, everybody...
And it exploded.
They fell apart until they realized there's all this...
And I think some of this now is there's still that hangover of we're all talking about it, and we take it so personally that we're not just instantly successful and everybody wants to be instantly gratified by our success enough to want to do it for themselves. You know, and I think that's a lot of it, but I think in the end it breaks down to just the core basics of the business decisions. You know, the financial irresponsibility, you know... Unfortunately, you know, I'm down here in South Carolina and, you know, in that Western North Carolina, Georgia market, and we've seen a handful of dealers go under and manufacturers go under just due to mismanagement, you know, and or not having a good game plan or putting faith in somebody or someone that they probably shouldn't have. You know, and some of us have taken advantage of those situations that have come along because it just pointed out. And again, did I do the right thing by helping a company that got stiffed on a bunch of debt by taking some of that debt for them and by absorbing, you know, yes, I did. You know, can I pat myself on the back that I helped them out more than I did myself? I can, but in the end, it's a lie. It was a business decision. You know, it just was. Yeah. And if I try to go sell it as something else, I'm not being true to it. Yeah. But I can tell enough people that I did that eventually they'll tell me my clothes are beautiful. And I think that's the thing. Some of the facades are starting to fail. You know, it was one thing when a shed was $3,800, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. Now an average shed's, you know, $6,000, $7,000. Now we're all playing in tiny homes and big buildings, and, you know, a mule's, you know, 50, 70, 80, 90. I love that big, what is that, the mule 9 thing. I look at that, it's like, you know, the hulk of a mule, and I'm going, it's $100,000+. You know, I remember when mules were 15, 18 grand. It's going, you know, we're playing at a scale now, and I'm not saying it's not worth it. I mean, you know, it's just, you know, trailers are 100 grand, you know, trucks are 80, 90 grand, sheds are 7,000. You know, you were sitting here talking about, I'll go open a consignment lot. Used to, you could open a consignment lot with 75, maybe 100,000, and it would have 30, 40 sheds on it. Well, now 100 grand doesn't put 10, 12 sheds on a lot. So now it's $250,000 to outfit a reasonable consignment lot. Well, that investment scale is different. You know, 4 years ago, when you put that $250,000 out there, you had a carrying cost on your funds, either your cost of your own money to put out there and make nothing on, or borrowed money that was at 2, 3, 4%. Now that money's at 8, 9%, or your lost return on your possible revenue is higher. The game's changed.
Do you even see, like, I'm just curious, like, if you were starting fresh right now in the shed industry, and I'm going to use rent to own as the conversation piece here. Would you see the same, well, it seems the obvious answer to the same value now in getting your rent to own as previously? The obvious answer is no. But in general, do you see a lot of benefit of being in rent to own now? Like with the competition, scaling the way it is, the price of money, all the things, it's profitable, but how many people want to be in it? I'm just curious.
Thank you for listening to part 1 of a 2-part series. Be sure to tune in next week for more engaging conversation here at the Shed Geek Podcast.
Hey, this is Mo Lunsford in sunny Union Grove, North Carolina, and we want to say thank you to all the guests and listeners.